The Big 12 is back in action on Saturday, and we got a new face on the screen. What's going on here?
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
It is a crossover edition of Locked On Coogs and Locked On Kansas State. I'm host of Locked On Coogs, Parker Ainsworth, joined by Christian Rauh of Locked On Kansas State. Christian, I start every episode with kind of an awkward, odd, weird question for the people that want to talk in the comments but don't know what to say.
Uh-oh.
And it's really cold where I'm at. Sounds like it's not so warm where you're at. Hot chocolate weather. My question for you is hot chocolate just heated up chocolate milk?
Oh, man. Are you doing the powder or are you going like on the stovetop? I mean, there's a lot of questions to this. I think you have to really you got to get down to the down and dirty if you're going to discern if it's just chocolate milk. Now, I think you got to, on the flip side here, is boneless wings just really expensive chicken nuggets? Because if that's the case, then yes, it is chocolate milk.
Anything could be anything. I like where you took that one. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And I like having fun talking food with a lot of people, but the fun is going to be Saturday afternoon, I guess early evening, this basketball game between a couple coaches. Obviously, I really respect Kelvin Sampson, but I've got a lot of respect for Jerome Tang as well. An impressive resume to go from a high school basketball coach for a decade in Cleveland, Texas, for the Houston folks, Heritage Christian, to work his way up to being the head coach of a Big 12 program is no small feat. And so I got to ask, and I want to start the show here because I know the Kansas State folks might not like this. Christian, I started the year thinking that this is going to be a really good matchup between two really good teams, and I'm not so sure that's the case anymore. What's the problem in Manhattan?
That's a really good question. And I feel like if I had that answer, I would probably be like the king of the world in Manhattan right now, because there is so many honestly, there's just so many concerns about the basketball team. And you're right.
Okay, but there's concerns and there's Wichita State.
Right.
Right.
And there's Drake and there's St. John's. And then in this case, TCU and Oklahoma State that we just lost to. There's a lot of concerns with Kansas State basketball. And I think you said it perfectly, Parker, that at the beginning of this season, when you're looking at the schedule and you're seeing teams like Houston and Kansas and Iowa State, you were putting Kansas State with that category, thinking that they were going to be able to compete with the top of the Big 12 after this crazy transfer portal additions that they added. Kansas State put a lot of money into their basketball team this offseason to get players like Coleman Hawkins, to bring in a huge NIL package. I think they spent over $5 million on their roster this year, and that's a lot in the eyes of Kansas State, but it's just not clicking. And it took a very long time in non-conference, which is hurting the entire conference, might I add, when it comes down to March Madness. I think it's going to really hurt the entire conference. But overall, I don't think we know the exact answer of what's wrong with this team yet. And unfortunately, I don't know if we're ever going to find the answer, because once we finally do, I think the season might be over. But I do know this. And what I do know is that for some weird reason, they're really good at home against ranked opponents. And guess what? Houston is coming into the game on Saturday, ranked, and they're playing on the road. So maybe we'll get shocked again. But in my mind, there's still a lot of things to be worried about with Kansas State. I've really held my thoughts back, and before letting my fans know and letting my listeners know what I thought about this, and I might have to explode one of these days. And if it doesn't get any better this weekend, I think it might finally happen.
What you're saying is people should subscribe and hit the bell so they know when the live post-game reaction happens, because the camera might explode.
You might. You know what? We've only been around for about a month now, and I really love all the followers and our people making Locked On Kansas State my first listen, and hopefully for your listeners, maybe second listen after the show, the game on Saturday. But we've almost at 500 subscribers. We've only been around a month, so really cool, and I love the adventure we've been on so far.
Locked On is a great adventure, great community of like-minded fans. Ken Palm's got this one at 71-59. And I got to be honest, there's part of me to think that, and we talked in pre-pod, a little disrespectful. Houston winning by 12 points on the road would be a lot, especially I thought if Kansas State's a tough play to play 4 now. But also, Houston hasn't given up more than 55 points. And so we'll talk about Houston's defense in a minute. On Kansas State's offense, you mentioned all this money they're spending. It's turning into points. Who's getting all? I mean, are the dollars worth it? Who's scoring for these guys?
Well, if you look at it right now, the dollars haven't been worth it. And that's been the biggest concern among many. And the gripes, if you type in the word Kansas State on the Twitter X machine, you're probably going to see those concerns happening. And the main point of focus of that concern, Parker, has been Coleman Hawkins. He comes over in a transfer portal from Illinois, and he decided to go ahead and play one more year of college basketball instead of going to the NBA. He picks up a nice NIL package. I think there's reports around $2 million just for Coleman Hawkins alone. And unfortunately, at the beginning of his tenure here in the non-conference play, the narrative around Coleman Hawkins was he's a stat stuffer. He's one of those guys that's not going to score a whole bunch of points for you, but's going to get his rebounds, going to get his assists. He's going to be a facilitator, if you will. He's not going to be that guy, though, that you can rely on to get 20, 25 points a night. There was about a 10-day period off after the St. John's game heading into the final couple non-conference games of the season. And it seemed like that focus had shifted over to making that Coleman Hawkins had to be the playmaker. Things had to change, because if not, Kansas State was in big trouble. And unfortunately, shocker, spoiler, they're still in big trouble. I don't think that they're in a really good spot whatsoever. But Coleman Hawkins has shifted a little bit. We're starting to see him score some more points. We're starting to get him closer to the 20 points per game that we're hoping to get from him, but it's still not been enough for them to make quite an impact to, unfortunately, I thought we were going to be a potential Elite Eight team. Now I'm talking about us not even making the NIT, Parker.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the St. John's game, because a tough road game. And for what it's worth, I would say some of those St. John's are always kind of tricky, right?
For sure.
It's a lose-lose operate. You beat them, you're supposed to. You don't, you're embarrassed, right? But you've lost 4 or 5 since that one. So so I don't mean to act like this is a free fall and it can't get fixed. The Big 12 is a weird place where anything can happen. But also, what's happened in the, I mean, it's 5 of the last 6. So let's just call a spade here. Yep. And frankly, in looking at this and having not watched all the video, I might say the one you won is the best team, Cincinnati. Yeah. So kind of tell me what's been a trend. You said they try to shift more to Coleman Hawkins on the ball. Well, that's not working a whole lot. What's been going on?
Well, one of the biggest things is just trying to find, and what Coach Tang has said is buy-in. And there's been this big discussion off the court about finding this team's quote unquote buy-in. And I think this has to do with bringing all these players into the transfer portal and bringing them in. So are you really buying into making this team a cohesive unit that you can be able to compete with and win basketball games? That obviously hasn't been the case so far here. And that is a new direction that Kansas State has taken. You're not growing them into a program where you are building them to become a unit and being a team throughout the years in the program. But this NIL, this new era is a beast, and it's either an adapt or die aspect. In this case, they tried to adapt, but it didn't work out for them. They're in a really tough spot because right now they spent the money to make it happen and it's not working. So now they're going to try and go back to the well next year. And I have a feeling that it's going to be really tough for them to try and spend that same amount of money when the results didn't work. But they're going to have to try and do that again. But unfortunately, I do think that what's happening on the court, talk about the buy-in off the court, is that it's just not working. It's not gelling together. Hawkins was having a tough time trying to facilitate, and they did not have, and they do still not have, a true point guard to help make that happen. And it's been a really tough thing to watch for Kansas State this year.
Well, and like I said, 3 of their top 4 scorers were different schools a year ago. I'll explain why in a second, but I mentioned what your thoughts are on the guard, Brendan Housen. Great shooter, comes from Villanova. What is he spotting up? What's he doing?
Yeah, in the St. John's game, he went absolutely off, and most of that came in the first half of the game. The St. John's game was a tale of 2 halves, and that's really what changed and started this entire downfall of Kansas State. The first half of the game, they were exactly what you would expect this Kansas State basketball team to be. What everybody hoped and dreamed they'd be in the offseason, heading into the season's play. That first half of St. John's basketball in that Big East, Big 12 showdown was what you expected. Then things changed in that second half, Parker, and Rick Pitino adjusted well. No surprise by that. And it just fell apart, and they wound up losing by 16. And it was just an insane downfall. They lose a tough one to Drake, who was undefeated at the time. Drake's a really good team. They're very underrated. And then they lose a disappointing and embarrassing loss to Wichita State in Kansas City. The flip around was they finally went into the Big 12 opener against Kansas City, against ranked, and a ranked opponent. They were 16th ranked at the time, and they win at home on their home court. Jerome Tang is 3-0 in his time at Kansas State in Big 12 openers. So I don't know what the conversation was before that game, but he needs to keep having that conversation, because other than that game in that first half of St. John's, they haven't looked like a good basketball team all season. They've played probably at total of 60 minutes of good basketball all year, and that's not enough to be in there. But Housen, talking about him, I know I went off tangent a little bit. Housen is a really good player, shoots a really good three ball if he can get on. Last game against Oklahoma State, he only had 2 shots, and that was a big deal. They lost by 13 points, and Housen only had 2 shots. If he can get on, and Coach Tang said one of his biggest things in his post-conference presser after Oklahoma State was he needs to find a way to get more shots to Housen. So I would not be shocked to see him taking multiple attempts early in the game on Saturday.
Housen started off at Villanova, but I got to coach against him in high school, is why I asked about him specifically.
Oh, that's so cool.
He got us for 26 in high school, and it was perhaps the most impressive 26. And I can actually share you some clips from that one later, but because they didn't really ever run a set for him, he just got 26 running a Princeton-style motion offense at Amarillo High School. He's a Texan for my Locked On Coogs folks. Pretty crazy. All right, I want to talk some about why 59 might be a reach here in a second, but before we get too far, I do want to remind folks today's show is brought to you by Rocket Money, which is helping find subscriptions you might have forgotten about or might even paying for twice. All right, I admit that's actually happened to me. Had a few subscriptions I didn't know about on the phone, right? It happens to all of us. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so you can grow your savings and brings everything together all in one place. Whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year, Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using the app's premium features. For me, the best thing is that subscription tracker. Not going to lie about it. It's caught me in a pinch a couple times before my wife catch me on multiple subscriptions with the same thing. I used to cancel services I wasn't using anymore. It's all canceled right in the app. You don't have to go find it somewhere else. Plus, the goals feature, you can talk about saving, setting money aside automatically. No more stressing about budgeting. It does all that for you. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right. Now, hopefully me talking about Housen doesn't mean he goes off in this game and jinxes us on that. But talk to me about Houston does a great job of taking somebody away on offense, right? They do the old Bill Belichick thing for the football heads out there where they make you beat them with your off punch, your off speed ball, because they're not going to let you bring the fastball. Is Housen the off speed pitch? Who is the off speed pitch there in Kansas State?
Yeah, if you're talking about who's the wild card in the situation, not the go-to guy, but one that can be an X factor, I would say it's Housen. Overall, I think if you're trying to shut down the primary guy, it would have to be Coleman Hawkins, just because he is the one that's really changed the game for them. Although it's not living up to the standard most people are hoping for, he's still the guy for the Wildcats. But I think, if you're talking about a potential X factor and to stay in this game, you're probably talking about Housen, because he can shoot the 3-ball better than anybody on the team, and he's just a really good player. The problem is he didn't get a lot of attempts. So Oklahoma State did a good job at making sure that he didn't get a lot of attempts, and Kansas State didn't help themselves any better by not facilitating it to him. But if I was Houston, I would ensure that they are not having a good time on the perimeter of Kansas State, and you're doing a really good job at shutting down Housen, because I think Hawkins is going to get his. I think it's just going to happen. He's doing a really good job at posting up 20 feet, making shots, making good passes, moving it around. He's doing a good job of making that happen. If you can stop the second part of that process of whether it's Housen, Doug McDaniel, or maybe David Gesson. Sorry, I said his name wrong. I always say his name wrong. Then I think you'll be just fine.
These two teams, again, as much as I respect both coaches, don't meet up a whole lot. I feel like Houston's a team that's on ESPN Plus a lot for the national audience. Is there a mystique around this Houston team for Kansas State folks? What do Kansas State folks need to know, want to know?
Yeah, I mean, what in my mind is you're bringing in a ranked opponent into Manhattan, and in the eyes of Kansas State, you know that you have a 10-2 record against ranked opponents under Tang while in Manhattan, and that's a pretty good thing to see. So you have this optimistic view, but the way that you've played the last couple games, I think you had this feeling that there's no way they can keep that up. So what is Houston going to do? Like Kansas State basketball right now, it's down. There's no doubt about that. They're down right now. I don't know if they're paying attention to the rest of the conference because they know they can't compete with them. So I guess keep it simplified for my viewers. Who are the players that you really need to watch out for Houston this year?
I think the undercover thing for Houston right now is only kind of just starting to get national recognition. Is they're shooting the three ball as well as anyone in the country. They got a couple guys shooting over 40%. Emmanuel Sharp is shooting 48.7% from behind the arc. He's just starting small forward for the Houston Cougars. LJ Cryer, it's only his second year at Houston, but you might remember him as a Big 12 guy, or your fans might from his time at Baylor. He's shooting it at 41.2 right now. And starting point guard Milos Uzan, also a familiar face for Big 12 folks, as he played at Oklahoma the last couple of years. Milos is the only new guy in the 8-man rotation from last year's team. He replaces Jamal Shead. Jamal Shead is obviously very good. Jamal Shead's been a great backup point guard in the Toronto Raptors organization this year. But all those guys score a lot of points. All those guys do a lot of offensive things. I think the heartbeat of this team is a power forward, six-year man, Jawan Roberts. He's a 6'8" power forward from Killeen, Texas, and he just does what you need him to do. He's just doing the right thing at the right time more often than most guys. And all that is to say that they're shooting the ball well, and that's the under-discussed thing. The thing they're doing that I think is talked about is their defensive side of the basketball, it's defense side of the floor. They're keeping teams around 20 to 30 points less than they're averaging per game. And it's just, they slow the game down and make it ugly and make you use a lot of shot clock. And honestly, it could be a very low scoring game on Saturday. That's what, when I said 59, Houston's got 7 or 8 straight games now of keeping opponents under 55. So, that would break the streak of sorts. Can I ask how you are with ball pressure? How is Kansas State? If I say that Houston's going to apply a lot of ball pressure, how is Kansas State's point guard play in that sense?
Not great at all. And they've struggled with turnovers because of ball pressure. So if you're talking about trying to limit their possessions, and if you have a way to do that with intense ball pressure and you're forcing turnovers, you might have a really good job doing that against Kansas State this year. But I will say that, they haven't, if Houston's not allowed 55 points or more, and you said how many games now?
I think it's 7. They're going for 8 on Saturday.
Well, Kansas State hasn't scored that low all season long. Now they're going against Houston. This will be their second ranked opponent of the season. So it's something to keep in mind. But if their game doesn't play well against Kansas State, or I should say the flip side, if Kansas State's game doesn't play well against Houston, and you're talking to me that they're really good on all ball pressure and they're really good at shooting the three, as someone who follows the Wildcats and still is dealing with the pain, although they're not having a good season. I mean, they're 7-7 right now. It's not a good feeling to be at. I'm a little nervous of Houston. There's no doubt about that. I am expecting a loss. I'm not expecting a 12-point loss because of how they play at home, but when you're talking about how they shoot the three and how they have all on-ball pressure and the way that Kansas State has turned over the ball lately, I mean, Houston should be able to take care of them quite easily in this one.
Well, and I want to spend the third segment because I have a hypothetical question on roster construction. But when you start getting into predictions, you're saying a closer than 12 single-digit point kind of game. What is, as someone who's watched Kansas State much closer than my audience in Iowa, what's leading you to that conclusion? What's Kansas State going to do to keep it close?
It's got to be the home energy from the home court, and hopefully that hasn't gone away because of how they started Big 12 playoff, starting 1-2. And the losses to TCU and Oklahoma State. Look, in the eyes of Ken Pom, and we're talking about that in the projected ranks, TCU and Oklahoma State were the lowest in Ken Pom for the schedule. For the rest of the season for Kansas State, it doesn't get any easier than that. And they went 0-2 in those games. So hopefully the motivation, the momentum, and just the energy of the crowd can still stay going against a ranked opponent in Houston, because it does travel well and they do play really good in Manhattan when that's the case. If you've talked about that record I mentioned early, and if you can get that high energy from players like Coleman Hawkins, but especially Doug McDaniel, the point guard that has shown that he can have that energy. He had great energy in the Cincinnati game, which they won. If he can be on, if he can give you close to 20 points and maybe 5 assists, then I think that's when they can stick in this ball game and keep it close into double digits. If that doesn't happen, if that energy's not there, it could easily be a blowout, Parker.
So I mentioned I've got an hypothetical about the roster construction. Yeah. And these are two teams that have done this very differently. And I'm going to sound a little biased here because Houston's ranked higher and Houston's had success and Houston did some things very differently.
Yeah, they deserve it.
Thank you. But Houston is a lot of guys that Houston recruited out of high school. They have a couple transfers. I mentioned they brought in Cryer a year ago from Baylor and Milos this past offseason. Malik Wilson's a bench guy who started off at Louisiana Lafayette and then went to Tech and is now at Houston. Bounced around a little bit. But by and large, Manuel Sharp, Terrence Arsenault, Juwan Roberts, JoJo Tugler, Javier Francis. These guys are guys that came to Houston out of high school, and they're a veteran-laden group. They don't have a whole lot of guys transfer out. Tremont Mark at UT Austin is kind of the rarity. It felt like Kansas State has kind of intentionally done the opposite, where they are having some reloading each offseason. And sometimes that means, when Jerome Tang first showed up, they had everyone in America loved Marquise Noel because everyone could relate to being a small point guard, right? Like I think it's very relatable. But like they had some guys like that show up. They had a very different roster. Had some success. This year they have higher ranked guys with minutes in the Big Ten and Big East. Like you mentioned, Coleman Hawkins was debating being a potential second round draft pick, if not maybe a little better, and decided to come back for the NIL package. Does this mean they need to change course, or is this just a bad year because it's going to be up and down like that?
Well, it's been 2 years in a row where they've not had great seasons, and you can make that argument that, if it wasn't for players like Marquise Noel, that the Elite Eight obviously never happened, but because of a player like Noel, Tang got the type of contract and type of love that he's getting. Now it's a brand new, different kind of style, and he's had a tough time recruiting. On the high school level, I think that it's not much different than football in my mind, and I think it needs to stay that way. I think you should focus on the high school levels of recruiting and then just retool when it comes to the transfer portal, Parker. I think that's always been the case. I think that works for every sport in college athletics, even with the small roster size of basketball. You have to work your foundation at the high school level first, then just retool, add the pieces that you need in the transfer portal. You can't put all your eggs in a basket for just the portal and then rely on high school moving forward. Just because you have the money to do it, just because the collective's giving the opportunity to try for it, doesn't mean you have to take that route. I think Kansas State's learning the hard way in this case.
Well, and again, a guy I respect a lot in Jerome Tang, and frankly, a guy that was on the Baylor staff when they beat the brakes off of Houston in the Final Four. Houston made the Final Four early on in this, in this like window here, they're kind of nationally relevant, but they had been building to that point for a while, and it kind of was a gut punch to get there and take the take the beating they got from Baylor. I won't point out they played Baylor close to Gonzaga did in the finals. That's neither here nor there. But he's been around the block. He was with Baylor for a long, great stretch, and I think Scott Drew's a great coach. And Scott Drew gave him his blessing when he left for Kansas State. I can go back and find that back then. I wonder why he's doing this. He's a great coach. I don't know that he needs to be doing this. Do you have any, it's just simple as the guys have the money and say, hey, this is what we want to do. And why is he doing it?
Yeah, I wish I had that answer. I really do. But when you look at what's happening forward, it doesn't look like it's going to change, because the recruiting class for next year doesn't look like it's much better right now as well. The class for 2026 or 2025, I guess, whatever the number would be in this case, it doesn't look much better. There's not many players that are committed for the following year or the year after to put that on there. So there's still a lot of work to do for Kansas State if they want to shift that focus, if that's even what they intend to do. But regardless of the fact, I'm hoping that it's just they picked a couple players that just didn't work out. It didn't gel. They're more focused on just collecting the paycheck than gelling as a team and moving forward before they make that next step to the NBA. Maybe the Coleman Hawkins problem was, or the decision for Coleman Hawkins wasn't the best decision. Maybe you want to look at a guy that's trying to make the NBA or trying to make that next step up that still has a chip on his shoulder, rather than already declaring for the NBA draft and then taking a step back to collect the paycheck first. Maybe you have to get a lower level player in the eyes of that aspect. Regardless of how you decide to do it, I think you have to focus a little bit more on players' culture or buy-in. They keep using this word buy-in, Parker, this entire season. It's been the buzzword of the team. And I think they're having a hard time trying to find players that gel. And if you're going to try and focus on having that as a success, as a cornerstone of your program, then you're going to have to do a better job at recruiting, whether it is in that portal or in the high school levels, on certain character type guys that you're looking for. It sounds like they didn't do that this type around, at least in the eyes of Jerome Tang and his coaching staff.
7-7, 1-2 in the Big 12. Magic crystal ball tells you, but Christian, it's going to be a successful year at the end of it. What happens between now and then to make it successful?
I feel like it's almost out of the question that they don't make the NCAA tournament. Like, I was hoping for a bubble team after the way that non-conference started. But the two losses at TCU and Oklahoma State felt like a dagger. It really did, Parker. And I feel like you have to have, just to even remotely have a chance at making the NCAA tournament, I'm guessing 13-7, maybe even 14-6 in the conference is what you'd need after that terrible non-conference record. And I don't think that's possible. So I feel like a successful season right now for Kansas State is finding yourself back in the NIT and hopefully getting an invite. And that's not a successful year, but not getting an invite there would be absolutely dreadful. And I think you might see some conversations about potentially having a coaching change, regardless of how high the buyout is, if you don't get that in this offseason.
And that's just so bonkers, because like the cloud nine they were on anyway, just crazy.
2 years.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago, and that's just how fast these things shift and change. I will say, people get hot, can win the conference tournament, get in the big dance, in a a little bit more roundabout kind of way. That would take getting hot at the right time. I will say that other, Houston obviously is Houston, but you've got Kansas and Iowa State, both some rivalry mojo there maybe, and I would really appreciate if you could hand those guys some losses in a very selfish manner. Houston, for the folks at Kansas State that don't maybe know, is 11-3 at this point. 3 losses, 2 in overtime, none by more than 5 points. Auburn, Alabama, both in the top 5 at the time. It's been rough, but conference play is turning back around our way, and we'll see how this thing goes. Christian, it's Thursday. We've also got Friday's content, the game Saturday. Where can people find you, and what else you got going on at Kansas State this week into the weekend?
Yeah, we're crushing portal chatter over on Locked On Kansas State, because we have plenty of commits still. We're really picking up momentum towards the second half, Parker. We got 11 commits, and we have still some visits coming in. So lots of stuff over on Locked On Kansas State on the football side. Got plenty of momentum on that side, so we're excited. And we got to start talking about the women's team, because the women's team is ranked. So we're doing that over on the Wildcats as well. And you can find me on Twitter at Christian S. Rauh. I'm always talking anything, college sports, NFL. I'm excited for the college football playoffs this weekend. It's going to be a really good time, but you can find me over there.
Of course. And again, for all people, Locked On Coogs and Locked On Wildcats are on all your audio platforms as well. Hit subscribe, do it on YouTube, maybe one or two audio platforms. Just keep it wherever you're at. Whatever app you got open, you can find the Cougs and the Cats. Christian, thanks for crossing over the bit. Welcome to the network. And
Appreciate it.
Big 12 basketball is a ton of fun. I know it's hard to believe right now, but Big 12 basketball is a ton of fun. And hey, we got all the way past 30 minutes without me making a joke about the football game from last fall. Christian,
Ouch.
I'll leave that there. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for tuning in, making Locked On Cougs and Wildcats, Locked On Cougs Kansas State your first listen of the day. I always end it with Go Cougs. Y'all have a hand sign? Yeah.
We do. All you. I'll give that one to you.
Oh.